Scientists can't explain why you still haven't liked this video. Scientists can't explain the consciousness minimum. How many neurons can we disconnect before self-awareness ceases? There are people with disconnected hemispheres who function, people with lobotomies who function, people with massive surgically extracted portions of grey matter who function. If we kept sanding it down to the most necessary bits for just rudimentary awareness, how small would that pile be? I once read about a guy whose brain matter got slowly eaten away by an illness, like over the course of many years, but he didn't notice it because the remaining parts of his brain just took over the job. As they discovered it, there was more fluid than brain matter in his head. Spooky, but also super interesting. That is pretty interesting. The consciousness minimum. I mean, as animals, most of us have brains, and human brains are quite large, right? Especially compared to our body size. An elephant's brain might be bigger than a human's brain, but an elephant is like 50 times the size of a human. So it makes sense. Then you look at someone like Homer Simpson, or maybe an ostrich, whose eye is actually bigger than its brain, but ostrich is also massive. Small heads, but massive. So our brains are big, yes, a lot of matter, grey matter in this case, to refer to the mind, to the brain. But the question that scientists can't explain, they don't have an answer for, is how much of it is completely necessary? How much of it can we lose and still function? The definition of function is, there probably is a definition, but it's kind of ambiguous, because what does function mean? Because for me, I would say I'm functioning if I could, I don't know, talk, let's say. But maybe they say no, you don't need to be able to talk, you need to be able to comprehend. Your brain waves have to be able to move in a similar way to when you had a full capacity brain, and that was you comprehending, if that makes sense. Maybe I say, to function I need to be able to walk. They say no, we believe that functioning doesn't include walking, but it includes A, B, C, and D. Interesting. Scientists don't understand just how pigeons find their way home. Scientists have tested to see if it is visual, scent guided, magnetic, yet the pigeons find their way home while being blindfolded and more. Wow. They are remarkable birds, and apparently even a bit more mysterious. Specifically, pigeons. They say pigeons are the rats of the sky because, they scavenge a lot. They eat a bunch of food from any location, anywhere, and there's so many of them, i.e. the rats of the sky. This question about pigeons, now that I said that, I'm thinking about it. Rats and mice are very, very similar. Well, because not only can mice and rats shoot through mazes at lightning quick speed, but they also always know how to find their way home. A rat or a mouse can venture out into the city from, the suburbs, the countryside, and still find its way home. Probably scent based in this case. If you blindfolded a mouse, I doubt that will be of much trouble to the mouse because it still has its nostrils active. Might be a bit scary, but pigeons, wow, that is fascinating. Magnetic is quite funny. Scientists, just because it might be, they just tested if they use magnetic fields, magnets, magnetic poles to find their way home. But they don't. It's something completely different. Interesting. Scientists can't explain this. You continuously move your eyes all day long, yet your perception of the world remains stable. Your perception of this video is stable, unless I decide to edit this video and shake the camera. Got you there, didn't I? Didn't shake the camera. No, shaking my head though. That is because your brain processes predictions about your eye movements while you look around. Without these predictions, the image would just shoot back and forth constantly. But scientists have yet to sort out exactly how this happens and how it plays out in the brain. The human mind is genuinely fascinating. I've said this in at least 2 of my previous videos. The human mind is how it's evolved over time, and how the mind of an earlier version of the Homo sapien is probably completely different to the mind of a 2023 Homo sapien, for example, is absolutely fascinating to me when I think about it, because I think about these things on the toilet and in the shower and just before tennis matches, sometimes just after. And it's like, wow. In a previous video, I spoke about survival of the fittest and how naturally animals, their systems, maybe not just animals, it could be anything, plants, but naturally systems are filtered out and made to be the most effective. Yes, natural selection, survival of the fittest is about survival, but it could just be about effectiveness and efficiency. What is the most efficient way to do something? And the brain has figured out a way to filter out what it sees and basically stabilize it. Like a camera, like stabilization on a camera, on a GoPro or something. The mind automatically and subconsciously does that for you. I wonder what happens when, funny enough, maybe to do with the consciousness minimum, is there a part of the brain that if that part of the brain completely shuts off, now you no longer have that. So now whenever you look around, it's literally like absolute chaos. Does that happen when you get dizzy? How does that affect when someone gets dizzy? Someone spins around and gets dizzy. How is that affected if a boxer, let's say, is punched on the temple, behind the ear, and knocks his equilibrium off, and now everything he sees, his eyes are still open, but everything he sees is very wonky and very crazy. Scientists can't explain how animals perceive time. Dogs use their sense of smell to tell time. They took a dog who would get excited 10 to 15 minutes before his owner arrived home and set up cameras every day. 10 to 15 minutes before, the dog would spring up and wait at the door. One day, they pumped the smell of their owner's clothes into the house all day. The dog had no idea that the owner was coming home until he heard the door. They think dogs use declining smell as a time-telling system. The less they smell a scent, they know the longer it has been, and can even remember exact diminished smells to associate with time. That might be one of the most fascinating facts I've heard in 2025. Fact, but just a think piece, research, a thing that's been done, an experiment, the results of the experiment. So scientists can't really tell how animals perceive time, but with dogs, I wonder how cats do it, but with dogs, dogs operate kind of like me. So when I'm in my house and in my room chilling, I smell what my mom is cooking downstairs, for example. And let's say she makes something like rice and stew with some plantain. Okay, let's just say it was 3 p.m. I know the smell of 3 p.m. rice and stew, and I know the smell of 6 p.m. rice and stew that was made at 3 p.m. I also know the smell of 8 p.m. rice and stew that was made at 3 p.m. So, depending on the smell, will determine if I know that that rice and stew is cold enough, not cold, cool enough to eat, and it's not piping hot. Do you see what I'm saying? When stew is first made, when rice is first made, it's a very unpleasant experience to try to eat it fresh, because when the stew and the rice are both hot, you're going to find yourself blowing the meal more time than it spends to eat it. You're going to find yourself more time than it spends to eat the meal. It's not enjoyable. So I like to wait, and it smells like 7 p.m. bruh. But in regard to the dogs, this explains a lot. We have a 3-story house and a coonhound, a lazy coonhound. His rules of location are: if one of us is on the same floor as he is, he stays put. If both of us are below him or above him, he'll move until he's on the same floor of at least one of us. If he's on the main floor and one of us is upstairs above him and the other is in the basement below him, he stays put. And it's not like he gets up and follows when he sees one of us on the stairs. If he's asleep and we shift around, it'll take a few minutes, but then he'll move and get to the right floor again and lay back down to go to sleep. Clearly this is a thing. And it's fascinating, because when you think about it, to everyone and everything, time is everything. As human beings, of course, we have sundials, then we invented clocks and digital watches and all that, so we can tell the time. For squirrels, for animals that hibernate, they need to know the time to hibernate, they need to know the time to come out. For butterflies, caterpillars, they need to know the time to, okay, well, damn, it's time to hibernate, it's time to go into this cocoon and turn into a butterfly to complete my life's journey, my life's purpose. But they don't have clocks, so how do they tell time? I'm guessing every animal, insect, thing, creature has its own way to tell time. But honestly, this dog one is one of the most fascinating I've heard. We have many theories of how the universe came into existence, but without a complete theory of gravity, it's all open. Wow. Also, the moving sofa problem. What's the biggest possible sofa? You could move around a corner. I'm trying to imagine a really big sofa, and just like, I guess a single point would technically be a corner. I'm sure you can move an infinitely big sofa around a single point, if that's what they're referring to. But back to the theories of how the universe came into existence, but it's open to, it's open to discussion, it's open to hypothesis, theories, because gravity can't be explained. Without a complete theory of gravity, all of these are open. So basically, to start the universe, anything could have happened. And they all of these origin stories, origin theories of the universe and how it began, they all operate on the notion that gravity exists. But because there's no theory of gravity, like there's no set thing that gravity is, pulling force, blah blah blah, but gravity itself doesn't have a set theory to follow. A lot of these theories of how the universe started could equally be true. I remember watching one of my favorite podcast episodes of all time, Joe Rogan podcast. I think it's MMA episode 32, right? The guest was Faraz Sahabi, and he's an MMA coach, but in his spare time, he's a philosopher. And he was basically talking about the theory of gremlins and how the gremlin theory actually coincides exactly true with the theory of gravity. And his theory of the gremlins was there are invisible and imaginary gremlins, and they have infinitely long cable cords, and whenever you jump, a gremlin next to you, I guess, attaches its cord to you and slowly drags you down to earth at a constant acceleration, which is 9.81 meters per second squared. And literally, however you decide to think about gravity, the gremlin theory also works with it, and it's fascinating. It's the theory of gravity is so important in physics and how we perceive the world. Literally, how a planet spins, how fast a planet spins, the waves, why the moon affects the tides on Earth, gravity, the position of the stars in the sky, gravity, everything is gravity. How a planet, how a star, for example, is born and is destroyed and turned into a supernova. Gravity, yet we don't understand it. Scientists still don't understand the placebo effect, because the placebo effect works even when the person knows it's a placebo. And I think when I was young, like when I was 7 or 8 years old, there was a channel on BBC Three. Can't remember what the channel was, what went on, but it's the first time I ever heard of the placebo effect. And the placebo effect, people talk about speaking things into existence and how powerful the mind is at visualization, and how healthy your mind is can literally cause your entire body to react and respond in the same way. For example, if your mind is very unhealthy, you're going through a lot of mental turmoil, your body can start to break down, even though if you weren't going through that turmoil, your body would be fine. Depression is a mental state, but in terms of your appearance, your phenotype, it can take complete toll on your outward look and what your bodily functions are going through. And it's fascinating, right? Because a placebo effect, especially one that is known of, is very similar to visualization. It's very similar to that. I'm going to take this white pill, and I know it's not paracetamol, let's say. I'm going to take it. I have a headache and I'm going to take it. And in about an hour, even though I know this is fake, I knew it. It's fake. If I believe enough the motion of me doing it, because I've done this motion before. I've had a headache and I've gone to my kitchen, I've grabbed some paracetamol and I've popped them like pills that they are, and and an hour later my headache's gone. So I do the same motion, I set it up, white pill, and an hour later my headache could be gone. What cured the headache? Because clearly it wasn't a sugar pill. I don't want to call it self-healing, but is the body so in tune with itself? Is the mind so in tune with the body that the mind can choose, right, to shut off a pain, for example, based on a pattern that it recognizes? Like, I took this pill, and I've done it before. This white pill, I've taken it before, and my headache goes. But that's actually because it's paracetamol, actually works. It's a painkiller, but that's a pattern. My body doesn't actually know what's going on. It just realizes that it's relieved, right? So I do the same pattern and the body does it itself. If that's possible, at what point? My question is, at what point is an actual medicine, a medication with genuine things that it does, genuine effects, side effects, at what point was the threshold for the body to do what you're doing? That thing, that pill, was the threshold for the body to do what you're doing. And after that point, you literally need to take this medication for it to work, for the body to do the same thing. For example, maybe I have a headache and I take a placebo knowing it's a placebo and it does miracles, it fixes my headache. But because I have a migraine, which is a step above a headache, it no longer works and I need to take medication. Do you see what I'm saying? Scientists still can't explain why we have to sleep. We know the general theories, but we can die from a lack of sleep and also go completely insane. It's interesting to think about. It's interesting to think that of all our science and technology advancements, we're basically summed up to because we get tired, and if we don't do it, we can die. Basically describing sleep. Why do we sleep? Because we get tired. And if we don't sleep, we could die because of it. And that's all we know about the reason why we sleep. We understand the benefits of sleep. Wow, ASMR, I'm talking about sleep. I just now realized that, wow. But I'm sure that there are explanations out there on the internet of why we sleep, why we need to sleep. I'm also convinced that science doesn't really understand and can't fully explain why we dream either. I watched iRobot the other day, so now whenever I talk about dreams, I just think about iRobot and Sunny. Shout out to Sunny, salute to Sunny. But scientists can't explain why we sleep and why we dream. Now, personally, I can explain why you sleep. You sleep because you're subscribed to Roscoe ASMR on YouTube, and his tingly voice and his really informative videos, they just do something to you and you just sleep. But scientists, maybe these scientists aren't subscribed to my channel. Maybe they don't know Roscoe ASMR. No, but all kidding aside, sleep, right, is so important that, what do they say, we sleep for like a third of our lives. Because technically, if you sleep for 8 hours, then in 24 hours, 8 out of 24 is a third. So you sleep for a third of your life. Most people don't sleep for 8 hours. Most people do not get 8 hours of sleep, but you sleep for roughly a third of your life, which is a lot of your life to be doing one specific task, one specific thing. Literally to miss out on a third of your life, only experiencing 2/3 of your active, awake, functional, alert life because of sleep, means that sleep is very, very critical. There are some people that can operate completely fine, functional on like 5 hours sleep. Some people maybe even 3 hours sleep. But there is a minimum number, and everyone does it. There's no such thing as a person that can function 100% on no sleep. Maybe some can function longer than others. Higher level, higher performance for a longer period of time than others. But everyone must sleep. Just like what goes up must come down, everyone must sleep. So must you. You need to go to bed after a couple more of these. Scientists still can't explain, and maybe this links back to the gravity lack I should say lack thereof, of a complete theory of gravity, but scientists still can't explain whether the universe was nothing and then became something, or if it's in an infinite loop, meaning it has happened an infinite amount of times and will create and destroy itself for another infinite amount of times. This one is interesting because I've always thought that the Big Bang, I think I had a discussion with someone in my comments months ago when I dropped maybe a physics related facts video, and I was talking about the beginning of the universe, and they were explaining to me we were basically talking about how redshift occurs, and it's how scientists know that the universe is expanding from the point of a singularity, like it's expanding, right? And it's growing from one point, or I think the person said it's growing from everywhere. I don't even know what that means, right? But I've always thought, even when I was younger, if there was nothing, what is nothing? And then when the Big Bang occurs, if there's nothing, what banged in the first place? And whatever banged in the first place, where did it come from? Because if it existed, then technically there couldn't have been nothing. There had to be something to create the spark. You can't really have fire without ignition or a means of the fire starting in the first place. Do you see what I'm saying? People can explain it to me, but the question, it never really answers the question. It's never like oh, that's where it came from, or oh, that makes sense. And I guess this also makes sense that science can't really explain it. If the universe was nothing, what is nothing and becomes something? How can you have something out of nothing? A lot of times you have raw materials, and then those raw materials can create other things, but with zero raw materials you create everything, all the elements, water, environments, like climates, like that's why I think that loop, that infinite loop, actually, even the fact that black holes exist, the infinite loop actually is sensical. Scientists can't really explain honey coils. When you slowly pour honey down from a particular height, it coils in a random way. However, when it is closer or further, there are formulas that can derive how it coils. There's literally a video, but I'm not going to watch the video, and I can't click on the video because my phone is it's going to be too loud and it's going to take a long time, and everyone in my house might wake up and it's going to get complicated. But there are formulas to derive how honey coils. If there are formulas to derive it, that means that maths can explain it, and if maths can explain it, then scientists can explain that. Why have people sat down one day and derived formulas as to how honey coils when it falls from a specific height, and if you move closer or further away? Why? That's jobless, that's unemployed activity, and you know what? I love it. Generally speaking, science itself tells us how and not why. And this one's interesting because this sounds like a philosophical interpretation of science, and it's actually what I would really suggest you guys watch that episode of Joe Rogan, Faraz Sahabi, both of them, but I think it's the first one, which is number 32 of the MMA podcast, right? Like the way we interpret science, he described it as science is the belief, it's a belief system that the future will behave like the past. And I think I've actually explained this in one of my other videos where he described a coin, right? This is a £1 coin right here. And if you had never seen this coin before, you've never interacted with it, you've never seen it, I've never told you what would happen if you were to flip a coin, but you just picked it up and you flipped it one day and it turned into a butterfly, right? And you're like, wow, a butterfly. It's this thing, a coin, and when I flipped it, it turned into a butterfly. You did it 99 times, 100 times, 102 times, 199 times. You flipped it, it turned into a butterfly. On the 200th time you flipped it, if I were to ask you what you think would happen, you would say, I bet you if I flip this coin, it would turn to a butterfly. And 10 out of 10 times, you'd be right. But that explanation is basically how we as people, and even scientists, they think about and they view science. Science is the belief that the future will behave like the past. Fire is hot, and the only reason people know that is by testing the fire. You don't have to get burnt to know fire is hot, but that's called shared. It's called shared experience. I can get burnt, and to tell you that fire is hot, I can get close to fire and be like, whoa, that's hot. I can get close to a fire and be cold, and now I'm warm, right? So you don't have to ever experience that. I can experience all of that, and then I can tell you that this is what fire is. Of course, you're going to believe me, and then you're going to know that fire is hot. But fire, we don't actually know why fire is hot. For example, you can describe to me the thermomechanics. Oh, like this if it gets to this temperature can burn this, and that's all obvious. That's all stuff that we know. But why is fire inherently hot? There's certain things that we don't know. We just know how. Everything that you would describe to me, if I asked you why is fire hot, it would all be how, because that's science, but not why. I don't know if you can hear that, but it just touched midnight and there's fireworks. Someone has just randomly started to. It's not even November. This is not Diwali. This is not bonfire night. Shout out to Guy Fawkes. This is not Guy Fawkes night. Don't know why fireworks are going off in the background, but I guess this is a good time to end the video. You know what science can't explain? Science can't explain why you're feeling really tired right now and you're probably asleep. But I can. It's because you're subscribed to Roscoe.